Most of us are surviving. And so we're moving through the economy, this huge, as they say, pig in the python. And behind it is coming a baby bust generation before we get to the echo boomers, the kids that the baby boomers have. The result is that in Massachusetts, we project, I shouldn't say we, the US Census projects that there will be a growth of about 200,000 adults 18 and over between now and 2020, about 200,000. But it's made up of 378,000 people over the age of 55. People who are 45 going to be 55 10 years from now, and 181,000 fewer people. Now, cities like Holyoke are particularly susceptible to these demographics, right? Those demographics are real tough, and when I was with the governor the weekend before last, I said, our goal in Massachusetts, if I were to have a bumper sticker, is prove the census wrong. Prove the census wrong. We've got to make this projection. So we have that economic challenge, we have this demographic challenge, right? If we look at it, the US is aging. About 99% of all the net growth between 2010 and 2020 will be over the age of 55, 2/3 of them over the age of 65. Here in Massachusetts, 135%. Connecticut is 149%. So we're aging more quickly. What that is going to mean, because in a second I'll tell you what some of the implications are, we have to find a way to hold on to our young people, right? I sometimes talk about it in terms that people feel uncomfortable with, that we're facing the third Civil War. The first Civil War, of course, was North versus South, middle of the 19th century, over slavery. North wins. The second Civil War, which I'm particularly felt the impact of growing up in Detroit, was the Civil War in the mid-20th century, last century, which was over the question of where the industrial might of the nation would be. For all intents and purposes, the South won, where I was the last couple days. The third Civil War is the demographic Civil War. Where will young people be? And where young people will be is also where the companies are going to come. So we have to figure out how to win that Civil War. And we have to think about the kinds of communities we build that will be able to attract young people and keep them, not only when they're in college, at Holyoke Community College or any of the colleges and universities near here, but how do we keep them when they start having families? What kind of community we need to do that? That is actually part and parcel of economic development. Okay? Whoop. Let me just go back. This just sums that up, which says we're growing faster than the nation, and for the most part, we're actually in Massachusetts growing faster than the region. So we've got some work cut out for us. Okay, what's the impact on state and local government? Will the aging of the population have a major adverse effect on state and local revenue? I actually expect to be paying less tax in Massachusetts 10 years from now than I pay now. There are going to be a lot of people like me. Where will the revenue come from? For local services, for state services, right? Will this lead to an increased need for state and local services for us who are now baby boomers? We don't need Disneyland, but we need something else. And will the retirement of public employee workforce create a drain on state and local budgets, further eroding local aid? We're going to have a 7% cut this year. What will that all mean? Okay? Stubbornly high unemployment means there's sluggish recovery in state and local revenue, continued high unemployment insurance costs, continued high Medicaid costs. And here's the scariest slide that I've ever found. This is not my slide. This slide comes from the General Accounting Office of the United States government. And they've looked at the fiscal outcome, admittedly way beyond the time that I leave this earth, 2060. And here's the scary number. We have had a state and local operating balance with relatively small deficits as a percent of GDP up to about 2010. So this is, you take the deficits of all the states and local governments, the thousands of local governments in the states, add them together, and they only are about 1/4% of GDP this year when things are so bad. This year when things are so bad. Because of the rise in Medicaid costs and the costs of public employees' health insurance, GAO projects that by 2060, the total deficits of all local governments, if nothing changes, if there's no more economic development than we generally forecast, will be approaching 5% of GDP. That would mean an average deficit today in cities across the country and towns of 30%, right? So what the GAO says, unless fiscal conditions change, unless we get something that changes this equation, we're in real deep trouble, and it's just going to get worse and worse. Put together the economy, demographics, and the growth in these kind of fixed costs, we're dead. How do we avoid that? Well, one way we avoid it is control healthcare costs. And we're talking about that all the time. We just had a retreat with the governor, the lieutenant governor, Eric Nakajima's boss, Greg Bielecki, the Secretary for Administration and Finance, the Secretary for Transportation, Bob DeLeo, the Speaker of the House. Ed Markey joined us, the senior member of our House delegation. A lot of business leaders, labor leaders, and we all came to the conclusion the one issue we have to focus on, healthcare costs. And I know you talk about it every day. We got to fix that. Beyond that, we have to figure out how do we offer local services more effectively and efficiently. Last night I did Emily Rooney's show with Jim Fiorentini, who is the mayor of Haverhill, colleague of Mayor Pluta's, and it was all talking about how do we find new deals with our public employee unions, particularly around healthcare costs and so forth. Well, how do we make our services more efficient? But the real, and the third thing we have to do is start talking about more regionalizing. That's why having Pioneer Valley here is so important. But beyond that, the real answer to fiscal health is boosting local economic development. You can do all of those things and you're still in deep trouble. It's all about what this task force is about, right? It's the only answer that is a really complete and full answer. It means attracting business investment and jobs, retaining business and attracting it. It's generating additional tax revenue from new and expanded business for vital public services, and indeed getting more property tax revenue from new citizens who decide to locate here. So finally, how do we boost economic development in Holyoke? Well, we've been going around the country, and we have a new bumper sticker, and it says, "Make every mayor the CEO for economic development." I wasn't here to see how you ran your campaign, Mayor Pluta. I'm sure you talked about jobs, but the real question is how do you really become the CEO of economic development as your number one job, right? And in fact, this is what we were talking about when we were in Savannah. So this is what we're all about, making the mayor and the city the CEO for economic development. Well, become SWOT aware, know your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, capitalize on your strengths, mitigate your weaknesses, identify appropriate industry sectors that you have a shot at getting, particularly in a city like this with relatively low energy costs relative to other places because of hydro. Know the language and requirements of businesses. Lingo is important. Build a business-friendly environment. Those are the things we want to do. So what we did in 2006 is Holyoke went through the EdSet process. And then just a month ago, you did it again. First, as I said, first city to do it in the nation. And we've just begun the evaluation of that. We did it because we were interested in how do we help older cities, industrial cities rejuvenate. We were weighting the location factors based on the survey of our NIOP and Cornet Global folks. We developed this online questionnaire, a written analysis that we prepare, and it's a fully collaborative effort between the city and our staff in a secure information environment. It's the foundation for the economic development SWOT and the basis for practical steps that you can take towards economic development. So what did we find? We looked at 10 different areas that are important. I'll just go through them very quickly. One is access to customers and markets. What's your transportation system like? What highways are near? Railroads? Are you near an airport? We look at the concentration of businesses already existing in a community, what we economists like to call agglomeration economies. Can we get more and more in various clusters? We look at the cost of land. That turns out to be pretty important. The cost of labor, but even more important than the cost of labor, do we have the appropriate labor force for the companies who want to come here? We look at municipal process. What's your zoning variance process? What's your process over building codes? What do you do with brownfields? How do you deal with tax delinquent property? These things turn out to be really important for the people who help make decisions about where firms locate. What do you do in terms of the quality of life of your community? increasingly critical, the quality of life of the individual site within the community. We look at questions around business incentives, tax rates, and finally, access to information. So we learned, this is not me, this is working with site specialists, these are the things they look at. These are the things they consider. So, what are Holyoke's strengths? One of the really wonderful things you're doing is you have become very efficient in your permitting process. You get real green marks here. We have green, yellow, red. Green, you're doing better than other comparable cities and towns. Yellow, about the same. Red, not doing as well. We also can tell you whether it's really important or not. Working with NIOP, we decided what's real important. And on the report that the mayor will get and has seen, it will have a big black full moon. Very important. Don't mess this up. Half moon says important. Empty moon says much less important. We've been with mayors where they've gone through it and said, oh man, we're green. And then I'll say, yeah, and no one cares. And here, you're red, and that's really bad. That it takes you 9 months to get a building inspected is not good news for your town. No one's going to take a look at you. So you have a very good permitting process. Nonetheless, we think you can streamline it even further.